This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 342 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, and for this episode, it's the anniversary of our episode 286, which was our West Coast IPA panel. And to celebrate the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of that episode, I don't know why we're celebrating a 1 year episode anniversary. That seems a little egregious, but I mean, this is the beer world, right? We have to turn everything into a special event. And so we'll turn this one into a special event too. And no. Anyway, for this episode, we're going to talk about Hazy IPA. We've put a panel together with the crew you know, plus a new face and voice for this episode, talking all about Hazy IPA. Joining me again, Kelsey McNair from North Park. Welcome back to the podcast, Kelsey.
Thank you, Jamie. Happy to be here.
We've got Evan Price back to talk about Hazy IPA this time again. Welcome back, Evan.
Pally, hey, it's me. I guess that's what I sound like. I don't know. Never mind. Okay, I'm done.
Joining us, new to the podcast and new to this episode, Steve Parker from Fidens. It is Fidens, right?
It is Fidens.
Okay, I pronounce it that way, and people sometimes correct me incorrectly.
Nope.
Okay, perfect.
You are correct.
Steve Parker from Fidens in Albany, Greater Albany area, New York.
Yes.
Well-reputed Hazy IPA beer. If we're going to talk about Hazy IPA, we have to have an East Coast representative, and so there you are.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm the only one.
It's like us having conversations about German lager brewing with a bunch of American brewers, right? Like, this is the circumstance we're in. Beer is global. We're all making it, and our interest is talking to not just single conversations that define everything, but having lots and lots of conversations with lots of talented brewers across the entire spectrum, West Coast, East Coast, and whoever's making it well. I had great Hazy IPA in Mexico, and so. These days you can find, we've had really high scoring Hazy IPA from Canada, Europe. And so this is a global phenomenon. It's not just a regional thing anymore. Before we get too deep in this, let me mention we've tapped into a special co-host also for this episode because it just wouldn't be the same. And so joining us to co-host this episode, maybe not the biggest Hazy IPA maker in the country, but certainly someone who knows his way around an IPA or two, Vinny Cilurzo. Welcome again back, Vinny.
Thanks, Jamie. And thanks for asking me to co-host. I really appreciate it. So, I was thinking about this at Russian River. Hazy IPA, which is pretty much one beer we make, Mind Circus, is about 2%, just under 2% of our production volume. So it's not a huge amount. It never has been. It's never been more than that. But I kind of feel like I can learn something from these guys. And so, I'm looking forward to hearing the three of these guys talk. And it's my first time tasting the Fidens beers, and they're really great. I started drinking the beers the other night and saved the hazy ones for now. So thank you for the shipment.
Yeah, not a problem.
Well, we had to bring you on to co-host this one, Vinny, for two reasons. Number one, no one's going to lie to you or be cagey. You are the oracle of truth that has the ability to pull these truths out of everyone. And the other reason is because this way Evan couldn't cancel. And
I was waiting for you to drop that again. It's so good.
I had to do it because this episode, we were originally scheduled to record this. I wasn't going to tell this story, but now because you want me to, Evan, I got to tell this story.
Yeah.
The genesis of all this. Well, let's go back. The genesis of it was HomebrewCon, right? We were all pouring beer at the Welcome Fest for HomebrewCon. Joe Stang and I were pouring the Brewers Retreat beers that we made at the Brewers Retreat at Russian River, pouring on behalf of Russian River. And right next to us was Kelsey, and right next to Kelsey was Evan, or maybe it was vice versa. Anyway, after we poured beer for all the thirsty folks at HomebrewCon, Evan pops this idea out to us, like, we should do a Hazy IPA panel. And we're like, okay, let's do that. And then, some text happened. It's like, well, let's record it in person at GABF. And then the day before it was supposed to happen, the text came, like, what if we don't do it here at GABF?
And I got so much FOMO about this whole idea that I did less than 24-hour trip to Denver on that one. And I was just like, I'm going to spend 3 hours locked in a room for a podcast. And there's just so many people I'm going to try to like quickly see. And all I could dream about were just liters of Bierstadt lager. And maybe next time we just plan on podcasting at Bierstadt and then use a little QR code thingy, continue to get slow pour over and over. I think we could make it work somehow.
I will take that under consideration. Anyway, we bailed on the live recording, but the upside of that is that we were able to bring Vinny in for this conversation as a co-host and also to pay homage to our history. We are going to talk about Hazy IPA in this episode. We're going to get in deep on it. Before we do, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. Andy Joint at Big Grove Brewery says, we've been using G&D Chillers from the beginning. From our original 3.5 barrel pub system to our production brewery, we've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support wherever you need it. And quote, choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control monitoring on your next G&D chiller. And Turnkey Brewery Systems, production line design services, retrofitting processing systems. ProBrew can do all of this and more with any brewery, old or new, small or large. With an expansive list of breweries already served, their engineering team prides itself on providing a true turnkey solution built for your entire production line that can be easily customized to fit your operation. For more information, fill out their contact form at www.probrew.com or email contact@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you may have heard of Old Orchard, but have you heard of their newest flavors? Berry Blend, Blood Orange, Lemonade, and Tart Cherry are the latest additions to their lineup of flavored craft juice concentrate blends. Old Orchard's R&D team can also formulate custom blends unique to your needs. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Where should we get the discussion started? Maybe we start really quickly. Haze IPA, big thing? Still selling a lot of it? Still a driving, motivating factor for breweries? And I mean, we heard West Coast is dead, and then all of a sudden people started drinking West Coast IPA again. How's the balance now fit for you guys?
For North Park, we're definitely still selling a ton of Hazy IPA. It is our single Hazy IPA, Art is Hard, which is sort of a flagship in that category for us. If you factored in that we make a lot of variants of that beer, we do a bunch of different triple dry hopped versions that have like some added hops. If you amalgamated all of the different versions that we would do over the course of the year, that would take the number one seat in our tap room. It's not quite as popular in package compared to any of the double or triple or even quadruple Hazy IPAs that we might release in package. But those beers are like way more popular in package versus draft on site.
Interesting. How about you, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, we still sell a lot of Hazy IPA. I want to say from percentage wise, it's probably still 25 to 30% of sales for us, something like that. And yeah, I mean, we're releasing these beers probably anywhere from every week to every 2 weeks. And so we don't make as much as we make more West Coast IPA is what I should say at this point than we do Hazy IPA. But that flipped at a certain point for us where we were definitely very strong on Hazy IPAs. And then I don't know if people just stopped drinking less boozy beers, but we were just going to town with triple IPAs and double IPAs there for a moment, and those slowed down a little bit for us. Other than today's release, we're doing this, double dry hopped hazy triple IPA with Omnipollo and Fidens and so many other and a few other breweries that are on this thing, and yeah, that thing's flying off the shelf. But I digress. But Steve, I feel like Hazy IPA has got to be your bread and butter.
It is 100% our bread and butter. We do anywhere from probably 90 to 105 barrels a week. And I would say almost all of it's hazy.
Damn.
For the most part. Yeah. So we do like Jasper's like our number one seller. We do about 60 barrels of Jasper a month. Eugene's Axe is about 45 barrels a month. And then there's another 15 barrels of Jasper variant. There's Jasper Nelson or Peacherine. We just did like a double dry hop Jasper that dropped today, and it sells. I mean, it's between the tap room. Now that we have the tap room factor, which we didn't have for the first almost 4 years. Everything before that was we opened up our door. People would come and just buy cans out of our brewery. Now we have that draft option, which helps move things a lot faster. Draft, Hazy IPA on draft is still our number one, double is still our number one seller, followed by lager is 2. But, Hazy definitely is our bread and butter for sure.
I should note out there for craft beer and brewing subscribers who are listening, or even those who are not yet craft beer and brewing subscribers, that Steve a few years ago provided a homebrew scaled recipe for Jasper, their Hazy Double IPA. And if you're a subscriber, you can access that recipe on beerandbrewing.com. Okay, shameless plug off. But everyone's a subscriber, right? I mean, that's if you're listening to this, you should be a subscriber, right?
Yes.
Vinny, you mentioned 2% for you all.
Yeah, we're just a little small hazy IPA brewery that West Coast IPA never died for us. So I truly am. I said it earlier. I'm looking forward to hearing, what you guys do, what makes your beers different. I know a little bit more about Evan and Kelsey's beers, but Jamie, would you want to maybe start at the top with like the grain bill?
I was thinking water. I think maybe on this one, because when we're talking about hazy IPA, I mean, water is always an important subject in brewing, but it's an extra important subject and a real game changer, in particularly in this style, and probably doesn't get talked about enough in the nuances of that. So maybe we'll start with you, Steve, since you're the new guy.
Sure.
When you're thinking about hazy IPA, hazy single IPA, hazy double IPA, where do you start building water profile for those?
Right now it's a lot different than when I first started. Water profile, I think when this whole thing kind of jumped off out here in the early, like 2010, 11, everybody was calcium, a bunch of calcium chloride, as much as you could put in the water. I've changed drastically with that. I kind of aim for soft water. For me, it's kind of soft water, soft beer. We always want our beer to be approachable and drinkable. And so we've cut back on our salts and our water profile. We have pretty soft water at the brewery. So, I mean, our typical range is, is usually like 125 of calcium chloride to about 70, 75 sulfate ratio. And we always keep our total hardness below 350 ppm always. And that's just kind of how I've been doing it, and I've really liked the outcome.
How about your pH, your water pH? Because that can really drive some of the haze stability. I was, what I know, and doing a little bit of research with some actual non-hazy IPA brewers, asking them, some German brewers, Weizen type stuff. Was curious where you're at and the other two on the panel here.
So for our pH, our mash pH, we are pretty. I mean, I'm on our brewers. I'm pretty crazy about pH. We got to hit our pHs throughout the whole process. We take pH throughout the whole process. We are like 5.2 to 5.25 in the mash. Boil kettle, we will adjust. So after I add my whirlpool hops, we'll adjust. We're usually around. After the whirlpool hops, we add around 5.2. We'll adjust with lactic acid down to 5 for our knockout pH. And then we always check our pre-dry hop pH. Usually it's got to be around 4, in the 4.3s. If it's over 4.3, we'll knock it down with some phosphoric down around that 4, anywhere between 4.3, 4.39. That's kind of where we live.
Evan, how about you?
I echo a lot of things that he just said. especially for pH. Other than finished beer pH, I prefer it personally higher. We're ending around 4.7 for these beers, and
you're going to get us all in trouble.
FDA, look out!
Food safety.
Don't tell anyone. And Jamie, that I like one of the last podcasts, like somebody was like, yeah, I illegally got this Negra Modelo recipe, and you're like, oh, cool, yeah, we won't tell anybody. And it's like, here we are on this podcast. Anyway, yeah, so I echo a lot of things there. We're on the brew house, same numbers. We're also using lactic acid in these beers to adjust pH on the hot side. And then we are, for salts, we're a 6-to-1 ratio of chloride to sulfate. So there's a certain amount of sulfate that's going to be in our California water, and building that up in order to get enough chloride to balance things out. And I could tell you some exact numbers here that I have in front of me, and we're about 300 parts per million on chloride and 50 on sulfate. I didn't write down the rest for some reason, but at least I have that as my notes. And yeah, I think normal type of thing that we're going to do for every beer, where we are making sure that the carbon filter that we're using for this is sized correctly so that we don't have any chlorine, and we end up with good tasting water on its own. But yeah, the constant monitoring of pH throughout the entire brewing process is echoed with this beer style along with every other.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise. We're kind of in a similar place. Just looking at our water, it's always interesting because we certainly brew a lot of collabs, and I feel like that's one thing that it's either not a part of the conversation or it ends up being a huge part of the conversation when it comes to brewing hazy IPAs. And some brewers that we've talked to really push that chloride envelope to a place that I don't prefer it when it's super high, but we're pretty close to where you are, Evan. Our chloride level target is 175, sulfate at 75, and 125 calcium. And we're getting there. Everything's coming out of an RO filter for us. That water is about 40 ppm as it reads off of the membrane. And if we weren't doing that, the water in San Diego is just so inconsistent because it's coming from multiple water sources and it's changing day to day, not even month to month or seasonally. It's just up and down and all over the place. I get a water report emailed to me from the local effluent, and if you were trying to make adjustments based on that report, lay it out on a graph month over month, you just don't know. But then getting back to our process, we typically target around a 5.4 pH in the mash. And for most of our hazy IPAs, we're making an end of boil adjustment coming out of the kettle at 5.0. But again, through some collabs and some collabs with some very notable hazy IPA brewers that we've done, they always want to push up. I'm seeing let's come out of the kettle at 5.2, 5.25. Let's get that pH, in the finishing spot closer to 4.9. And I'd say ours tend to finish at 4.65, 4.7. Upward of 4.75. So that's our approach.
You said a finishing pH of 4.9?
Yep.
Woo.
Yeah, I mean, if you already have a high pH and then you've got a lot of dry hops. We talked about this in the West Coast. It's the pH is just going to drive up if you're not making any adjustments. Steve, you had mentioned, Steve, that early on you used a lot more chloride. What made you bring that quantity down aside from hopefully saving your stainless steel the stress of all the chloride.
I noticed with the higher chloride, I was getting more hop burn, hop bite on our beers. And so as I lowered it, I found that I could aggressively hop these beers because we hop pretty aggressively, and I didn't get that bite. I mean, it was like we turned beers around pretty quickly, 14 to 16 days, and I would drink them day of canning, and there would be no bite at all. They'd be smooth. So that's kind of why that was the driving force for that change.
I love that, dude. That's such what a cool move on your part to not only realize that, but then also make that change and to see something come out better on the other side. Like, there's so many things that happen in our industry where everyone is talking about this certain procedure or ingredient or whatever else, and a lot of times you have to think outside of the box a little bit with all these different variables. And I love that comment.
I'm curious. I'm curious about this pH question. From a sensorial perspective, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9. As Kelsey, you mentioned brewing some of these and other collaborators wanting to push these. What do you get sensorially from these pH levels that that creep up like that?
It's interesting. I do think
I imagine it's all about hop expression, right? I mean, it is for sure. I think that when we're ending up on the lower zone, where we tend to land with most of our beers, we get this really nice expression of citrus, that we're pulling out of the hops, and there's almost like a richness and a more fullness to the body that you're perceiving when that pH starts to creep up and up. And that's really kind of the differentiation point that I'm finding, is that these beers just drink a bit fuller when that pH is on the upper end of the spectrum. But it's a trade-off because we are losing a little bit of that acidic element. I mean, we're talking about, logarithmic scale. So it's so much more, toward basic than it is acidic at that point. By going that much higher. And, I've got text messages from brewers where they're like, oh, I just checked the pH on this other brewer's beer, and check this out, their Hazy IPA is like north of 5. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? It's just, it's crazy. It's like, it's higher than I would come out of the kettle after all the dry hopping. But then, I'll kind of see like what the overall consumer perception is of that beer by jumping on Untapped or something, and they freaking love it. And I'm like, wow, okay, and so, but for my palate and the way that we're designing our beers, I tend to favor that, kind of 4.6, 4.7 zone. I think our beers drink really a bit more crisp, a bit more refreshing, when we're in that spot. 4.7 sounded like such a scofflaw when we started this conversation, Vinny, and now he seems like such a law-abiding citizen.
It's still over the legal limit for the FDA.
It is. Let's change gears and talk about grain, because I think that's a great place to go. Before we do that, streamline your efficiency with Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout series. The DKO series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. The strains now better. Available now for made-to-order pitchables at any volume. Contact Omega Yeast today at omegayeast.com. Also, ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. And are you planning a brewery, considering the purchase of an existing brewery, or are you working in the industry and kicking around the idea of realizing your own brewery vision? If any of these apply, go to breweryworkshop.com right now. Check out our upcoming Brewery Accelerator, March 24th through 27th in Austin, Texas. Some of our favorite award-winning brewers are joining us to help share the knowledge you need, like Marcus Baskerville of Weathered Souls and Joe Morfeld of Pint House. This will be the only Brewery Accelerator event in 2024, so don't wait. Secure your spot now at breweryworkshop.com. Let's talk about grain. Vinny, where should we start talking about that?
Obviously things like oats and wheat are critical here, but I'm curious, we've heard over the last year or two on the podcast here, lots of West Coast IPAs are moving towards Pilsner base malt. Is that something all three of you are doing for your hazy IPAs all the way across the board? Or do you maybe mix it up with some like two-row versus Pilsner malt? And if it's Pilsner malt, is it foreign or domestic? Domestic meaning North America.
Yeah, I'm super into this very pale hazy IPA personally. So we're doing our best to make the white ale of hazy IPA, where we're using Gambrinus Pilsner malt for these beers, which is
really light in color.
One of the lightest colored Pilsner malts I can get my hands on. I want to say that's Canadian, off the top of my head.
Yep.
And then we've got flaked wheat and we've got flaked oats, and those are unmalted wheat, not flaked wheat. So we have unmalted wheat and we have flaked oats. Man, I'm really throwing that out there. But so 60% Pilsner malt, 30% unmalted wheat, 10% oats, and then that ends up making most of our hazy IPAs across the board. And then all we're doing from there is using Belgian candy sugar to bring up, well, let's see. On the hot side, there is some additions of, depending on the ABV, where we will start off with a little bit of brewer's crystals that to bump up gravity, and then and then we're using some Belgian candy sugar in the fermenter.
That's a pretty high load of adjuncts, maybe much higher than a lot of other brewers that I've talked to over the past year or two. Why put your brew staff through that kind of challenge? What do and I imagine you probably tested less too. What is it about that kind of 40% adjunct level that or non-barley grain level that what does it add to the beer? Whether that's texture, whether that's some flavor, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of the texture is honestly hop related in this beer style, but I'm going to do my best in all other areas to boost that up as much as possible. And so on the grain side of things, there is absolutely an impact that you can have, but I think that's where the oats are really helpful. I mean, the unmalted wheat I'm in love with for how pale in color it is, as well as helpful stable haze. We use bioglucanase in these mashes in order to not have a sticky or long runoff, and so that's the saving grace for the brewers right there. The moment we learned that trick, I slept a little bit easier at night for sure, because we definitely had some hard days there for a moment. But yeah, so that ends up being really helpful. But I think the mix of these just produces a beer that is full, rich, and then also very pale with this milky white haze to it that I really appreciate.
Did you get better extract when you started adding the enzyme to
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we got a runoff that was faster, that was almost identical to our normal barley runoff, and so in some in our other beers, and then yeah, I don't think, I mean, our efficiency on these beers are not great because the starting Plato is so high. I want to say for our single hazy IPA, it's a 17 Plato starting gravity because we are looking for a good amount of finishing gravity to keep the body on these beers rich enough and with that mid palate sweetness.
Kelsey, let's talk about your kind of approach to grain.
Sure. Kind of our base point recipe, and this does drift around, but I'll just kind of lay down the foundation and kind of talk about some of the differences. So for like a hazy single IPA or even a double IPA, we're usually around for a house recipe 60% pills, and we like Breeze. And for the reason that Evan said, I feel like the West Coast Hazy IPA is most assuredly trying to be very milky white pale. I see a lot of the New England style IPA, getting more into the orange color zone. And I'm trying to highlight hops here as much as I can. And I'm not looking for a whole lot of supporting, malt flavor. So I tend to really focus on the pills as the base. I like Fawcett malted oats for our adjunct of choice. They do come with the husk, unlike, Crisp is a dehusked malted oat. The color value on that is also very low. And it certainly makes lautering, very nice and easy because the husks are massive. And then, this was a trick that learned from Steve through early collabs. We use Best Chit malt. And that was kind of the first conversation I had with Steve about brewing collab was, man, Steve, how the heck do you get that really kind of rich, pillowy mouthfeel? And I'll let Steve talk more about that when it's his turn. But that kind of, when we brewed with that once, I said, okay, this is kind of a fold in for like all of our hazy IPAs. It's such a hat trick. Like it's awesome. And it just drinks differently than, say, any other dextrin malt that I've tried. So I really enjoy that in the recipe. We also, like Evan, use brewer's crystals because it doesn't add any color and doesn't add something that's totally 100% fermentable. We're just trying to get that beer so pale. And for like a hazy single IPA, we're typically around 16.6 Plato. Our double IPA will take up to 20. Those are all the fermentables happening on the hot side. But then when we go to, anything that's a triple IPA, quadruple IPA, we even did a quintuple IPA this year, just for fun for our anniversary. When we go north of 20 Plato, we were finding that, because we like to harvest yeast, and I know we'll talk about yeast later, so I won't go too deep into it, but we found that the viability drift was, and the finishing gravity was so inconsistent when we would go north of 20 Plato that, I introduced, Belgian technique of feeding the fermentation. And we use Belgian candy sugar syrup for the triples, quads, and et cetera. And we do those doses when we're adding the dry hops, so that we're scrubbing the O2 at the same time. It's just convenient to do that all in one step. And then, to just kind of elaborate, bioglucanase, yeah, absolutely. That stuff's amazing. So we use that too. We've been using that for a long time. And sometimes when we do collabs or just want to, get a little bit more like deep, more complexity within some of these grains, sometimes we'll use some Fawcett wheat malt. Sometimes we'll use some flaked oats, raw or flaked wheat. And when we do that, we're kind of cutting away at the base, and obviously when you're adding in a lot of that adjunct, it is going to be at the expense of some mash efficiency. And we've seen some of those mashes where it's like 40% base might drop down into the, mid 60s for, efficiency. And boy, do my brewers hate graining out when you've got this soupy, nasty, just oatmeal that's just, it wants to unload the second you open up the mash tun, and heck, it might even be, a bit dangerous if they're not paying pretty darn close attention. So, at your own risk, obviously, when doing that type of thing. But we do find that there is some element of viscosity, kind of fluffiness that you get when you really start pushing heavy on the oat and the wheat, and a variety of them. Those beers are very enjoyable, but yeah, they are a pain in the butt to make.
I got one more question, Kelsey, on the base malt. I remember from our West Coast IPA panel last year, you were talking about, if I remember correctly, the Wireman, the extra pale premium pills, if I remember. Is that correct? Yeah. And then you just mentioned Breeze pills here. Why the change, and is the color like similarly light for the Breeze? It's been a while since I've used the Breeze, but I remember it being light, but I just can't remember.
Yeah, it's, on the spec sheet, it's like 1.2. So it is the lightest colored one I've found. And that was the reason that I tried it in the first place, and just kind of stuck with it. Like I said, not looking for malt flavor, just looking for a foundation, and in the interest of trying to get that color as low as possible. If I could find a lighter colored base malt, I would give it a try. Just because, and that was the other thing, like, the Fawcett wheat malt was the lowest colored wheat malt I could find. It's a little hard to get though, because not all of the Country Malt Group warehouses stock it. So it's a special order item for us. But yeah, that's the reason. I liked the results and didn't really find a reason to shift. The price point too, is obviously better than the extra pale pills from Wireman, without sacrificing quality in the beer.
All right, Steve, tell us more about this Chit malt that Kelsey stole your thunder on.
No, it's I guess I'll start with my base. I'm on the opposite end. We use two-row for all of our beers. RAR two-row.
Why?
I like it. We've done Pilsner. I've brewed Jasper with Pilsner and Jasper with two-row, and I enjoy the two-row better. I think we still achieve that color because today everybody drinks with their eyes first. I also think a lot of the color depends on the hops that you're using as well, for us at least. And I don't mind that little malt sweetness in the beer. I think it gives a little bit of that juice kind of aspect with that aggressive hopping, and it kind of also with the aggressive hopping, I think that little bit of sweetness helps balance it and kind of gives you that full aspect of drinking the beer. So that's kind of our brewers and I have sensory Pilsner beers and two-row beers, and just for us, our personal preference for what we do, we stick with two-row. And then we're about 75% two-row in our base, 20% oats, flaked oats, and then 5% chit. The chit malt was just something I stole from the Scott Janis book back in the day. And I didn't use it at first. And then when we started using it, we noticed mouthfeel was better. We just been using it ever since. And it's just been great.
Love that chip malt idea.
Yeah.
Kevin's taking notes.
Yeah.
I got my pen out, I'm here to learn too.
What do you find the difference between chit and say a dextrin, Carapils from Breeze, or, any number of malt companies, BSG, RAR has dextrin, and European companies?
I couldn't really tell you. It's just, we've used it and I've liked it. And I want to say something in the IPA book talked about how it can help with beer stability that Scott found out in his stuff. So that's kind of why we stuck with it. Don't quote me on that, but we've been using it for pretty much We started using it about 6-7 months into opening the brewery, and we haven't stopped.
Who's your vendor for the Chit malt? We've used it before. I can't remember who makes it though.
Country malt, Best.
Best. Okay,
malt.
that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, that one has a much lower extract than most of the dextrin malts. It's like 27 points per pound per gallon.
Whoa.
Whereas I think most of the other dextrin malts are like 32 to 34. And I think there was something in, I'm pulling this out of the back of my head. So what I remember reading was that there's some thiol precursors in that malt that might make their way through that could also contribute some interesting flavor characteristics downstream.
Steve, have you ever made a beer without the Chit malt and then like done a side by side, and then also was the foam different there? Because I know Chit malt
foam was different. Yes, okay. Yes, that was a big thing. We weren't getting the foam wasn't as nice without the Chit malt. I mean, we have made beers just strictly 2-row, and I've loved them, and they tasted great. But once we started out the Chit malt, the foam was drastically better.
All right, so you should see a 10% discount on your next Chit malt order since everyone's going to be ordering it, Steve. So, it's just like the Wireman premium pills after Kelsey gave it a plug last year.
Oh yeah. Kelsey, you couldn't even order that anymore, right?
No, I went to order it right after the podcast went live, and our CSR at Ben at BSG, he's like, all the warehouses are out of that one. I was like, damn it.
Nice job. You kind of stepped on your own toe.
I did.
Oh man.
No.
Steve, I'm curious about this. You're, at 25% adjunct, you're, good 15%, 15 points under someone like Evan, and yet as I'm drinking them side by side here, you're not giving up any kind of, body or smoothness. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, there's, what do you think is making the difference here? They're both equally hazy. In fact, yours actually might be a little like more murky, than Evan's in that kind of haze side.
Which beer are you drinking?
Fill in the blank.
No, that one's not the.
I should drink something hazier. Okay.
Well, that's just that's just a lower. That's a single dry hop level. That's not the the big daddy levels,
All right, let me pour some swim test just so that we can.
There you go. I'm just saying, apples to apples here.
All right, dead equivalent. Equivalent. Okay, there we are.
I think a lot of the color comes from the hops during dry hop. I mean, we will pull pre dry hop samples, and they all look the same. And then there's certain hops that I know when I use it, and we've changed our recipes and our dry hopping because today it's so much about what that beer looks like at first. People will look at a beer that, like Kelsey was saying, that's a little more orange. You'll say, "Oh, it's oxidized," and it's like, no. It's not oxidized. It just sometimes the color, certain hops just don't give you that color. So we've learned that over the years.
What hops are your biggest offenders and colors? And we're not going to talk about the rest of hops, but yeah.
Wait, you're saying color, or are you referring to haze? Because
haze. I guess haze. I would say. Sorry,
absolutely
haze.
Yeah, different hops having different levels of haze. Is something that is frustrating for us brewers trying to consistently make some, which I'm excited to get into haze conversation at some point. But sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, no, there's just some Mosaic is one that is usually just a hot side one for us most of the time now because that does not give us that haze. Strata happens to be another one. Simcoe slightly. Simcoe's okay if you pair it with some other ones, but we can get deeper in that in the hop conversation, but that's and then again too with the 75%, it goes back to me I think sometimes the heavy proteins and going too protein heavy in a grist can sometimes give you hop burn. A lot of studies talk about how the polyphenols hold on to that protein and it's harder to drop out. So that's something that we've just kind of stayed away from. And that's kind of been since day one, and it's work for us.
Yeah, that goes back to the work that John Paul May did at Steiner, and I believe it's the xanthohumule, if I said that correctly, if I'm remembering correctly, the polyphenol that really is that kind of emulsifying binder, and I can see that. And for what it's worth, Steve, I just did a quick chat GPT on the Hazy IPA recipe, 26% roughly. So,
was it? Oh, all right.
I was just having a little fun there. So, well, I mean, if you just to kind of maybe roll into the Haze conversation, if you talk to some European brewers that are, making wheat beer, that sort of thing, or maybe, whether it's Belgian or German or whatever. I mean, a lot of them are talking about using less than that. And so, I mean, obviously it works either way, because you guys all three of you are doing it differently, with our two West Coasters being a little bit higher, but obviously the 25% works just well. And I've heard others being a lot less also.
Yeah. We go less in some beers. We do go more in some, but on average, it's right around that.
So a quick yes or no answer. You can't give me a long drawn out Evan like explanation. Yes or no. Have you ever had a Hazy IPA that you finished that ended up being clear?
Yes.
Steve?
I would say yes.
And Kelsey?
Yes.
Yeah. This to me was the hardest thing. I mean, when we started making a Hazy IPA, that was the biggest challenge. I personally found this to be one of the biggest challenges in my brewing career.
Yep.
Because at some point gravity wants to take effect. So how do you get those really fine proteins to stick and not be these big giant proteins that just want to fall out? So like, what did you do with that beer? I think this happens more than we think or want to admit with our peers in the industry. So what did you do with that beer? And also, did you figure out what it was? Because like I said, that to me was the biggest problem when trying to figure out this Hazy IPA thing. The true challenge. So Steve, how about you?
Oh, me? So I think it goes back to that conversation we just had with the certain hops. It was one of the hops that we have found out that does not create that haze in a beer, or it does not stay very long. So that's why I do not use those. And it's just learning where to use the hop, I think, is the important thing with this style. And so it was all mosaic beer, and then it dropped. I mean, it wasn't crystal clear, but it wasn't hazy.
Right. So I'll counter that, and maybe all three of you can chime in. So a German or a Belgian hazy wheat, Belgian wit beer, Belgian Hefeweizen, they don't have hops to lean on. So, and is there anything? Have you guys thought about that and how? Maybe, they don't have the hop polyphenols to lean on. They have to go in other directions. And maybe that's a place for us American brewers to learn, or Hazy IPA brewers to learn.
I mean, I feel like they're looking for a different level of haze than what we're looking for, though. Like, for you to create something that's this milky and like, I mean, milky is always kind of the term I use whenever I refer to the haze level in our beers, but like when you're talking about a lot of these beers in regards to haze level, Hefeweizen absolutely in traditional beer sense has haze to it, but finding that level consistently throughout from bottle to bottle or whatever else, depending on shelf life, you're going to see that haze change, at least in my experience. And but in regards to these hazy IPAs, I mean, we're talking about a haze level that was so extreme and so laughable that it became, among brewers everywhere, just like, wait, you're putting that beer out and it looks like that, and you're like, yeah, that's actually the goal, and it's just like, I don't understand, and it's like it's such a obviously a craze that happened and everything else, but it was just like, I don't know. I don't think that they, I totally understand your question, Vinny, but I don't think they relate enough together because the fill in the blank beer, as an example that Jamie was just pouring, that's wonderfully hazy for a Hefeweizen as an example. That's hazier than a Hefeweizen you would get on the Hazy IPA front. On the other hand, though, I think that specific beer is a little bit lighter on haze than other examples that we make because it's only a single dry hopped beer, and the heavier we're going on these hops, the more extreme that haze can become.
And so that really is one of the differentiating procedures that you guys use at Green Cheek, is like the more dry hops tends to drive that heavier, more milky haze, which is a great term. I use that as well.
Well, I remember, let's see, I think it was in 2016, I tried making my first Hazy IPA with our friends at Cellar Maker. And Tim at the time didn't realize, I don't think, or he didn't want to tell me that he was using a haze positive US05 or Chico strain. And we tried making this Hazy IPA by using Chico yeast, a normal one, and just making a flour slurry and putting it in the kettle. And I mean, we got labels made and everything for this beer. This was pre-Green Cheek, and this beer comes out and it's like, it's as clear as any IPA we've ever made, and it was just laughable. I mean, obviously not at the time, we were really upset, but this long, slow process of continuing to, like, especially at that time, try to find information in order to figure out how to make the beer the way that we're talking about right now. A lot of mistakes just like that were made over the years. But I think one of the biggest things for us at our brewery is dry hopping at the correct time is very important, so that there's activity happening for the yeast. There still needs to be enough of a cell load in there, and I wish I had a specific cell count to give, but I don't. And then the amount of hops is so important, where if both those things don't line up correctly, we end up with a beer that doesn't have the entire look that the people that are wanting to drink these beers are looking for.
Yeah. And what did you do with that batch that wasn't hazy, that fell clear, unfortunately? Not the Cellar Maker one, but just in general. Like, we
dumped it. Like, we couldn't, whenever you have a beer that is a perfect tweener, where the West Coast crowd isn't going to drink it, and then the Hazy IPA crowd's not going to drink it, you just kind of have to count your losses, because you're going to have such a tough time trying to pretend to figure out a way to sell that. We've purposely made tweener beers before, that we've called soft IPAs, and those have been on purpose. But for the beers that we've tried to make hazy IPAs, and they've dropped clear, like, down the tubes.
Yeah.
I'm curious about this. As Vinny was mentioning, like, these, larger proteins tend to, precipitate out. Are you all using any mash strategies in particular to try, to pull smaller and smaller, protein out of that mash process, which would theoretically, produce more stability in the finished beer?
Yes.
We do not.
What'd you say, Kelsey?
We do use Brutan B in the mash for these beers, and that helps to. It's a chelating agent, so like oak tannin, and it helps coagulate some proteins. So I do think that downstream that's helping. I introduced that in these because as I was seeing our beer kind of migrate in cans, and forward thinking, that particular product is supposed to encourage shelf stability. And when I started using it, I was more thinking about our barrel-aged beer program, where we were putting imperial stouts in spirit barrels. And so that was kind of a mash process that we used there. And then kind of plug that into the Hazy IPA program.
How about you, Steve?
No, we do not.
All right.
That's it.
I mean, that's it. I don't mean we don't. No, we just do regular mash. No, we don't. We don't use anything in the mash for anything.
Fair enough.
We pasteurize all of our wort.
You know about pasteurization in Haze, though, right? It's a way to kind of break the protein, and you can create. I think there's a lot of European breweries making German wheat beer that are going that route to try to get a permanent haze, and I know there's American breweries doing it as well.
Well,
but I know you guys are all small breweries, and you don't have a pasteurizer just sitting around either.
Well, let's shift gears and talk about hot side, and which is really just Whirlpool, right? So let's switch gears, talk about that. But first, SS Brewtech was founded by a group of home and craft beer brewers dedicated to bringing an engineering-first approach to brewery equipment. SS brewhouses are used to formulate new beer recipes at some of the world's greatest breweries. I think that refers to a certain guest on this podcast, or a certain co-host on this podcast, and are the cornerstone of many local breweries. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. That's right, with 39 days, Thursdays a year, Vinny, you're brewing on your SS Brewtech brew house?
I did 39 last year on our little 5-barrel, and I'll throw in a plug for G&D Chiller, too, at the front of the podcast. I love our G&D Chiller. So
there you go.
Good company, and nice of them to support this amazing podcast.
Well, we appreciate them too. Also, have you heard of Christian Hansen? They're the fermentation experts with over 100 years of experience in dairy and wine, and they're now bringing that knowledge of microbes to brewers with their Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria. This portfolio allows for consistent performance at the brewery and produces a range of high-quality brews. Reimagine what your beer can be. Go to chr-hansen, HANSEN.com to learn more on the Smart Bev line of products. All right, let's talk about getting into the hot side there. Are any of you all setting up some initial bittering charges, or do you just roll right through the boil into Whirlpool before anything fun starts happening?
We'll do like a 10 to 15, 60-minute charge. And then just going to Whirlpool after that. We Whirlpool at 2 pounds per barrel. Yeah.
Evan?
Yeah, depending on the beer, we have some beers that are some of our bigger beers where we're doing little sprinkle additions throughout to just help build a fullness during the boil. But 90% of the rest of the time, it's a Whirlpool only addition, and it's a dipped coolpool addition as well. And so we're typically bringing that Whirlpool down to temperature to 165 degrees after the boil. We are throwing in hops. We go pretty light on Whirlpool. We pull most of those hops to the fermenter instead. And so usually, depending on whether it's single, double, or triple, we're not going to go over a pound per barrel in that addition. One of the things that we've been having fun with are these like liquid hop concentrates, so we have like Incognito or 702 Trial from YCH. And so there's this fun trick that we learned from our friends at Range out of Australia, where there's a really small addition of pellets that go in with the 702 Trial into the Whirlpool. So you throw in a pound on our system. We have a 20-barrel kit that we're brewing most of our Hazy IPAs on out of our Costa Mesa brewery. And so we'll throw in 1 pound of hops. We'll throw in say 2 kilograms of 702 trial, and then the small amount of pellets just helps keep everything in the wort, and it doesn't end up sticking on the sides of the kettle. Without that, that small amount of pellets, we're just, like me and Kelsey have talked about this a million times, and how useless it is to try to throw that stuff in the whirlpool. And so we've been enjoying throwing that in, especially for hazy IPAs, because there's aroma and flavor, so much aroma and flavor that we're able to get out of that, instead of, sort of this tactile bitterness that we're not looking for in this style necessarily for the most part. And so that's been really fun. And then there's obviously more additions down the road from there, but since we're only talking about whirlpool, that's what we do. Kelsey, what about you, pal?
Yep. We're a little limited with our kettle. It doesn't have a good diverter system for pellets, and typically we're lucky if we can get away with a little more than 1 pound per barrel in the whirlpool. Otherwise, we end up having to make a few extra barrels of wort in order to, knock out a full tank, which we generally do. But, we don't try to, our brew house is 15 barrels. We're usually making 19 barrels of wort, which ends up being concentrated by a couple barrels. So we do water back. That's kind of our hot side process most of the time. We kind of target, like Steve said, somewhere around like 8 to 10 IBU from an early bittering addition. But to that end, like 21, we got medal at JBF for Artist Hard, and that beer actually had no hot side hopping in the kettle at all. Everything happened post. There was no bittering charge. There was no whirlpool. And maybe a segue to the next part of the conversation, but the concentrated flowable hop products technique that I talked about in prior podcasts was definitely a key component of that beer at that time. We've since introduced a small bittering charge in that beer, like 10 IBUs, but everything else is happening out of the kettle.
When we do that at our brewery, on the brew sheet, it says NP-style. Whenever we're doing our incognito or 702 trial edition. And then I try to draw a picture of you, Kelsey, with the little crown on next to it as well. It works out pretty well. The brewers understand immediately
what you're going for. Yeah. So do any of you use concentrated pellets like cryo or CGX on the hot side? And do you see, in conjunction with a cool pool, because it sounds like all of you are doing some sort of cool pool technique. Do you see an added benefit that adds a haze positive quality to your beer?
Who wants to go first?
Well, you can, since.
Sure. I mean, we don't focus too much on whirlpool hopping for these beers, honestly. But if we are going to use, at this point, if we are when we use something like cryo or CGX or whatever, that we are bringing down the load, honestly, because we're concerned about the overall balance of the beer. And on the other hand, West Coast IPA, put it in there. We want that bitterness and everything else. But I don't, at this point, I feel like if we could drop that temperature, the whirlpool down even lower, and didn't feel like we were going to contaminate every single beer after that, we would drop it even lower and try something. But I'm going as low as I can go at this point.
Yeah. Hey, Kelsey, on the NZ hop foo, is that hazy? Does that end up being hazy, or does that end up being clear?
No, that's a clear beer. Yeah,
because I've seen and heard from some other brewers that sometimes, like, some of those New Zealand hops in a cool pool end up throwing some haze. We've certainly seen it as well. and just curious, but that one is clear for you.
Yeah, it does clear up. I mean, that one gets, it gets biofine. We don't have a filter or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
We've also seen like low level haze from certain hops for sure, and like West Coast IPAs or New Zealand IPAs or whatever, or just clear IPAs. But it's typically not. I mean, I guess in this point in craft beer, even when that haze is slightly there for those beers, there's nothing that I'm personally going to do about it to try to change that, because people can still look at that and know they are definitely not getting a hazy IPA when, again, it like looks like this.
Anything else to hot side, or should we start talking about the Kelsey method of dry hopping?
and P style.
NP style, right? We're just going to embarrass Kelsey here, and I should say this is Vinny's term.
It's so easy. It's so easy to embarrass him. It's great.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Let's move to fermentation. Yeah.
Let's get into fermentation and dry hopping. Kelsey, why don't you? It sounds like you use the same process here that you use on West Coast IPAs for your hazy IPAs, or at least a similar process. How does it vary?
Yeah, we do. The dosing rate, when we're talking about flowable concentrated hop products that we're knocking out onto a dip hop, we typically stick to around 1 kilogram per turn. And like I said, we're usually kettle full at 19 barrels at knockout and might knock out 17 and a half into the tank. We've gone as high as 2 kilograms, and some of those beers are awesome, but expensive. And so we kind of save that for special projects. But yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what I've described before, where we're taking about 3/4 to a full barrel of wort that is sitting at our cool pool temp of about 165 to 170 degrees. We're sending that through the heat-X into a tank that already has the flowable preloaded. We'll let that steep for a few moments. We'll continue to knock out at an adjusted knockout temperature that'll get us to our target pitching temp. And the one thing that you have to keep in mind when you're utilizing this process is you will have a stratified layer of hot wort that's, at a temperature that will kill your yeast. So, if you're pitching in the top or something with a fresh pitch, or otherwise, you absolutely need to burp the tank through the cone with some CO2, which if you do this for about 30 seconds, and we've trialed this when the wort is at the manway door level, so you can actually put your hand on the door and feel that it is, exceedingly hot. About 30 seconds of bubbles through the cone, at maybe 20 psi is enough to cause a homogenization and bringing it to a temperature where the tank is pretty safe to go ahead and pitch. And we're still getting up to speed with some of this equipment on our end. We haven't been checking our O2 levels in our wort stream and knockout, but when I did a brew at the propagator with Sam Firestone, we did check the differential between the O2 levels pre and post this burp that we did through the cone, and it wasn't enough to disrupt the amount of dissolved O2 that we wanted in the wort to have happy, healthy yeast. But definitely an important step, because that's if you're talking a barrel, 3/4 of a barrel out of 15 barrel tank, whatever you're knocking out, that's a lot of heat that's in a small amount of area. So, but
are you Evan and Steve, are you guys using the Kelsey flowable high oil technique as well?
No, not for we for most of our hazies, we just use pellets in the whirlpool. Like I said, we do 2 pounds per barrel. The reason we go that high, and we go about 180 on our whirlpool, I go that high because I'm trying to push as many of those survivable compounds into that tank to last through fermentation. And I also believe at that point, I mean, they talk about biotransformation with the contact of yeast and hops. I mean, if I'm pushing that much hops in there, I mean, what better time for my yeast to interact with my hops is at that beginning stage of fermentation. And so we knock out. I mean, are we just getting into that, or do you want to get into fermentation stuff? Or are we just?
That's my next question. So if you want to roll in, I'll just throw out. Actually, let's let Evan answer because I'm curious. Because I actually don't know if Evan uses the high oil extracts in the brews. I mean, being that you make a little caricature of Kelsey on the brew logs, I'm pretty sure you do. But
we use it more for West Coast than we do for Hazy IPA, honestly, because we're looking for just enough hop character to do exactly like what Steve's talking about with the biotransformation, to where we can have, a beer that before we dry hop smells like an IPA. Because I think that when we've tried to do, there's enough breweries I've talked to out there that do a Hazy IPA where they do no hopping at all in the kettle. They don't even do what Kelsey's talking about, and then they dry hop the beer. And I think those beers just have a hole in the middle, and they don't have that biotransformation, for lack of a better term, that you can get via whirlpool additions or Kelsey's technique. And I think that's needed in order for it to get into the right spot.
So I have a question about fermentation temperature. Are you all thinking about this? Like you hear a lot now, especially with like West Coast IPAs, I'm going to bring down that primary fermentation temperature, sometimes even using lager yeast, like Highland Park does, and many others, trying to give it a clean slate? Or are you thinking of this as like a warmer fermentation? It's an English yeast often, so maybe it's more estery and that's going to meld with the hops. I'm curious where you're all at there. Evan, you take it.
Yeah, so for fermentation, we are, for single IPA, we're typically knocking out at 66 degrees to ferment at 68 degrees with a free rise to 70, 2/3 of the way through fermentation. And then we're harvesting day 3 or 4, depending on activity. And then we're immediately dry hopping.
Is that different than West Coast IPA?
I think for West Coast, we're like for sure day 4. And that activity that I mentioned earlier is so important to make sure that we have fermentation still happening. It's like this perfect moment that at least our brewery is waiting for, where fermentation has slowed down just enough to where we can harvest yeast, because we need to do that. Otherwise, we would spend incredible amounts of money, which I think we already do. But yeah, man, we do. Anyway, but for West Coast, on the other hand, I mean, day 4, we're not looking for haze, since that's not important. But on the double and triple IPAs, on the other hand, we are fermenting a little bit cooler at 65 degrees, and then the highest it gets to 68 degrees. But yeah, I think overall we do a really low pitch rate on these beers, and then a really high oxygen amount. And so, we are a brewery that counts cells for all pitches. And so we are pitching these beers at 375,000 cells per milliliter per degree Plato. And so that's over half of the normal pitch rate that you would use in a normal ale fermentation. But then we're hitting it at like 20 parts per million on O2 at knockout to keep that just absolutely rocking. And so those two things, I think, really help. And then what else should I tell you? I think
you're intentionally stressing, and then you're intentionally also aiding and assisting.
Yeah. Hey,
and are
for a non-brewer, you threw out some good shit, Jamie. I'm like, that was good, dude.
Are all of your tanks single batch, or are they any of them double batches?
I was totally gonna nerd out on that too, but I felt like I was talking for too long, Vinny. But yes, they are double batch brews.
Do you do it over 2 days or fill the tank in 1 day?
So it's 2 days of brewing for that, and we're actually, and this is where it gets even smaller of a pitch. We're only pitching that amount of yeast for the single first batch, and instead of calculating the total amount for both batches.
Yeah, he's doing term, it.
Drought. Yeah, Jamie and I talked about this the other day, but that term Drauflausum is brewing into one tank over 2 days is something that we've found that we've learned from some other breweries is like you're stressing the yeast somehow, and it's really aiding in haze, and that has worked for us. So I'm curious, Kelsey and Steve, if you guys are doing that.
Wait, how do you spell this?
Drauflausum. I don't know how it's spelled. It's just German for brewing over a couple days.
Love it. Drauflausen.
Yeah. If you can Google it on the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast or website, and I think it comes up.
That's probably one of the Oxford companion definitions.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah.
Thank you, Garrett Oliver. So, Kelsey, how about you?
Yeah. So most of these beers are a single turn. Art is hard, and occasionally if we make, a double batch of a hazy pale ale or another hazy single IPA, they do get, 2 turns, and those would be over the course of 2 days. Otherwise, our higher gravity stuff, and we tend to repitch our yeast once a week, and we'll either do that into 1 or 2 beers because we have 11 tanks. So most of the time it's just a single.
And are esters an important part to a hazy IPA for you, or are you trying to keep it a cooler fermentation temperature? And then I know you said you don't have a wort DO meter, so you wouldn't be able to check this, but it also makes me start thinking if esters are an important part to either any of you guys or anyone else, like you could take that approach sort of, I mean, to a degree, Evan's doing it, but you hear about it from like Weizen brewers or Belgian brewers where they, under pitch and under wort aerate to maybe get more esters, but maybe that's not what you're going for.
Yeah, we ferment a little warmer than Evan does, and just talking to Evan, we're using the same yeast strain, so we're dealing with juice from Imperial A38. I'm sure we were going to talk about yeast.
I'm joking.
And I mean, we're definitely on the high end of aeration compared to anything else that we do. So, our cellar run is pretty short. We're knocking out through a, 1.5-inch hose, and it's, we're running the, at 5 LPM for a 40-minute knockout at 17.5 barrels. We'll bench test that soon. I just got the equipment in this week. To kind of see what that is and dial it in. Our pitching rate has been higher than Evan's by twofold, but we've actually been experimenting with bringing that down a little bit for these beers, and we don't make too many adjustments for higher gravity, if ever, but we knock out at 64, set our set point at 70. And then when we're about 75% attenuated, we'll let it rise up to 73. And we don't take the tank down in temperature at any point until we're ready to crash. So there's no soft crash or anything going on. And you asked about esters, Vinny. Sorry. I would say just considering what I said, like we're on the upper end of the temperature spectrum there. So I think esters are pretty darn important and homogeneous with the hop character that we're going for.
How about you, Steve?
Yeah, so we dock out at 70 and set the tank to 72. I'm also like Evan. We underpitch our yeasts. We're probably around 450,000 cells. But we also, I don't oxygenate too heavily. So we stress our yeast pretty heavily, which is why I only go about 2 to 3 generations, and then I cut it and get something new. We got a smaller system, a 7-barrel system, but we fill 30-barrel tanks. So it takes us 4 turns to do that 30-barrel. So we'll put in 3 turns with a smaller pitch day 1, and then come back day 2, put the last turn in, but with no oxygen. And then usually when it's time to, I'll harvest a ton of yeast out of that 30-barrel, and that will last us a while. And then after we don't dry hop during active fermentation at all. We wait for the beer to completely ferment out, and then we soft crash from 72 down to 65, harvest, and then dry hop.
These guys mentioned they use A38. What are you using? A similar London Ale 3 kind of variant, Steve?
So I do use juice in some beers. Our house strain is actually it's a little bit off of Chico. We use A72 from BSI is our house strain. I wanted to go something a little bit different, and I really like the character that it gives our beer a lot. So that was something that I found. Actually, I heard it on a podcast from a brewer that used it, and I was like, I'm going to use that. I like that brewer's beer, and I was like, let me try that beer. And I called BSI. They gave me a sample, and I said, this is it. This is what we're using.
I think that's so much, Steve, part of what we all do here, where you continue to find your own way based off of what your preferences are. And it's just funny whenever somebody comes along and is like, oh yeah, well, not to say that this is what we're doing right now, but in so many situations, yeah, like what hops are in here, what yeast is in it, and it's like, don't you want to find your own way? Don't you want to be able to have that journey? I think the journey is important, I guess, is
it's very important.
In order to then, one, have that much more pride in what you're doing, but then also, two, it's yours. Hopefully from a standpoint of nothing else tastes like this.
That's I couldn't agree more with that. When I first started this journey, I didn't ever want our beer to say that beer tastes like so-and-so's beer.
Right.
I want them to say that's a Fidens beer.
Absolutely.
And when they have it, they're like, oh, that's Fidens, and that's something I really took a lot of pride in when, making our beer and getting it to where I want it. And, when our customers can blindly taste a beer and they'll say Fidens. And I'm just like, yes.
Yeah, that's rad.
Yes, that's what I want. And because sometimes it's fun. We'll just walk up to people, hey, try this beer. We won't tell them what it is. And they're like, oh, that's Fidens. And I'm just like, okay, that's what I want.
Nice. So as I'm listening to this, I think there's some interesting tensions at play. Obviously there's this Kelsey method of hopping using advanced hop products, right at knockout. And, rather than Whirlpool, there are, Steve mentioned not dry hopping during active fermentation. I think most of us know a lot of the, research that Omega has been putting out is that haze stability, definitely carries through better, if you are not dry hopping during active fermentation. And yet at the same time, Evan is also talking about the importance of biotransformation as this, conceptual piece, that helps fill the middle of the beers. These things all seem to work in an interesting, tension with each other, where you are trying to balance the flavor and development versus also the kind of, physical, haze stability in this. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Evan, do you dry hop during active fermentation? You mentioned biotransformation, but you're trying to accomplish that without also pulling away from this kind of haze stability.
And Evan, as a follow-up to Jamie's question, you said you're harvesting yeast before you make the dry hop, so you must be far enough along that the yeast has said, I'm going to flock out. Do you know where you're at into what gravity you're at, or attenuation you're at into fermentation that, it's probably pretty far along if it's flocking out already.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like as an example for, say, single Hazy IPA, if we're finishing at 4.5 Plato, we're harvesting a little above 5 or 5.2, maybe as high as 5.5, depending on the situation. And then there's a dry hop. And
some of that could be hop creep as
and
well.
Then and that's exactly what I was about to say. And then there's a small amount of creep that comes along with that. And yeah, I mean, we have a pretty quick warm time on these beers of typically around from when we send it into the fermenter, about 7 days, maybe 8 max, where we dry hop a beer and then 3 days later we're crashing that beer. And there's, I think that the thing that really, at least for us, we've tried to do true active fermentation dry hopping. And to your point, Jamie, the haze levels on those beers were actually worse. And we also felt like we weren't getting the hop expression. Like, we got fruit and we got some really neat character there, but it wasn't something that I personally was very excited about. And so as we continue to move it towards right at the end of fermentation, just enough time to, exactly what you said, Vinny, be able to harvest yeast. And then something that Kelsey touched on earlier, that about the Belgian candy sugar and these other beers, where for us double IPA and triple IPA, we're harvesting yeast, we're adding a little bit of sugar, and then we're dry hopping at the same time. And man, the amount of cool things that are happening all at once with being able to do this, from having healthy yeast all the time, no matter if we're brewing a triple IPA or a double IPA, like, we're going to end up with really good yeast. We're getting way better haze stability because we have some activity fermenting with those hops. And there's this aspect of like just dank sort of garlic onion characters that are able to be minimized through that small fermentation that I really like as well. And I feel like I'm missing one thing, but there might be another thing. But all in all, it ends up being really beneficial.
Do any of you think that you get more and maybe too much of that dank onion garlic quality when you dry hop too early, or are those unrelated?
Well, I think you scrub, a good amount of that off. I feel like part of that is volatile, but it also is so varietal specific and lot specific. Because we certainly do get that sometimes, but it tends to be, we end up with that character when we've used too much of a variety that is a known contributor of that. And we try and minimize that by adding those hops later. So, I think there is something to adding them too early.
How about you, Steve?
Yeah, like I said, we dry hop kind of cooler. Wait till the fermentation is complete.
What temperature is cooler?
65.
Okay.
So we're fermenting at 72. Once everything's done, once it's been at terminal for a couple of days, we bring it down and we dry hop. Like Evan, I don't keep the hops on the beer very long. We're dry hopping. All of our dry hopping is done over 2 days in smaller doses. So we dry hop day 1, dry hop day 2, make sure everything passes sensory test. Once it passes sensory test, we start the cold crash process. So usually it's the hops are not on the beer any longer than 5 days before they're put in the bright. I think if hops sit on beer for too long, that's when you start kind of pulling some of those flavors you don't want.
Yep.
And I also think it goes like what Kelsey was saying. That's why you have to sensory your hops before you put them in. I mean, if you smell a bag of hops and you're rubbing it and it smells like garlic and onion, it's going to smell like garlic and onion in your beer. Don't use, save that for the hot side.
Hey, save that for your spaghetti sauce. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So, we always make sure that, everything smells right before they go in. If the hops smell good, then we drop them. If not, we usually hold those. If those sometimes those hops, sometimes it has that smell, we just keep it for the hot side and use it in the whirlpool.
So it sounds like you don't lager your or condition your hazy IPAs that long. You get them out, and you found that balance that you don't get a lot or if any hop burn on the back end. Right.
Yeah, it just comes through that whole process of from grain bill all the way through. And no, like I said, we're probably grain to canning, and I mean just because we have to, probably 14 to 15 days. We're turning those beers around. We have a lot of tanks, so we have 9 7-barrel tanks, 1 10-barrel tank, 6 15s, and 3 30s, and we don't have a lot of brights, so we gotta get beer. We gotta get beer canned and then get those brights open to get the beer in, because I do not like leaving our beer on the hops for very long at all.
I like doing this like 7-day cold on the hops. Like I feel like there's like this development that happens, at least for me, that I feel like the beer is halfway there when we have it, say, warm at our 68 degrees or whatever else, and then we crash the beer to 32 on these beers, and then I want the beer to sit for 7 days, and then we're going through our transfer. But I feel like they're like, it's not until we're then going to transfer it to where I'm like, yeah, that's like where it needs to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I cut you off there. Sorry, Vinny.
No. Kelsey, I was going to ask both of you. You've been speaking so much. I was going to let Kelsey get a word in edgewise. I love you, Evan.
Jamie loves that, dude. Look at Jamie. He's turning red.
I was holding on to that line in my head, Vinny, and you just beat me to it. I love it.
So, I mean, 7 days is a good amount for most breweries out there for IPA. So, Kelsey, where are you at on that conditioning side?
Yeah, I mean, unlike Evan and Steve, we're at a bit of a disadvantage because our brewery is set up as a unitank only. Anything that we've got on the non-unitank side are serving tanks, and we can't package off of those because of the temperature, and we don't have a counter pressured canning line. So when we're working with our schedule and trying to figure out, when we're going to package, we tend to brew. Most of our tanks are on a 3-week turn, where we're packaging every Monday. So the hazy IPAs, because of the contact time concern, are getting brewed with more of like a 17-day tank residency. So we tend to brew hazy IPA toward the end of our week, when we've packaged off several tanks and we're refilling them. And then, we do tend to do early dry hop when we harvest yeast, like the day of. And that usually is something that's not going to contribute a big polyphenol hit. So, trying to avoid hop burn, we're using a concentrated pellet at that point so that we're not sitting on a bunch of leaf matter that's going to give you that, grassy intensity. And forward thinking for additional hop additions, whether we're double dry hopped or triple dry hopped, those additions are happening, much later in that second week, where, it's going to sit on those hops, and we're dumping the cone every day. And, we haven't walked through the whole dry hop process exactly, but
you're shaving the cone.
Yeah, shaving. Yeah, we're shaving the cone. Shaving the cone.
Damn it, Kelsey, we've already gone through this.
Yeah, we have a vernacular for this. I know.
You gotta shave it, Dad.
Got to shave it. Yeah. You're getting the yeast out. You're getting the hops out. But we don't want to be sitting on a bunch of hop material. So as much as with our limitations of our cellar, we're trying to mitigate this, extended contact time on hops. After we're doing our final charge of any T90s, and, also to just kind of mix this in, we were talking about, Haze coming from certain Southern Hemisphere varieties on the hot side, I mean, that largely, from what I understand, is derived from polyphenols. And so, that is your hop burn source. Anything that's contributing haze is going to contribute some element of harshness when it is polyphenol. So, we want to introduce that as late in the dry hop as possible, especially on our system, knowing that we're going to have to sit on some amount of those hops through the entire duration of our tank time. So if I'm using a bunch of Nelson or, especially anything from Australia, Galaxy, Enigma, that type of stuff, Vic Secret, I want our warm beer in contact with those hops for the shortest amount of time. And when we're crashing that out, I want to be dumping those out of that tank as quickly as possible. But we do a recirc step to resuspend everything, before we are doing a final crash. And our tanks are outfitted with a tangential recirculation port on the upper body, where we're coming out of the cone, spinning the tank, and it whips around. You can actually hear the vortex going on inside the tank. And I feel like with our limited cellar conditions, those tanks are the best possible tank to be able to get everything to drop down into a tight, formation in the cone and be able to remove, the hot material from the tank. So, yeah, I mean, we're kind of making the best of what we have to work with. If I could go into a bright and package off of it, if I had an extra 20 square feet of my cellar to do that, I would, but I don't have that luxury right now.
Was there more there from Steve?
For that, so as far as our process, like I said, we soft crash to 65. Another thing that we do is we close the tank. Probably 2 to 3 days before final gravity is going to be hit, and we build some natural pressure in the tank, a little bit of natural carbonation. And the reason that we do that is that we dry hop everything under pressure. So I have like a hop cannon on top of the fermenter. We load 11 pounds of hops at a time, CO2 purge it, bring it up to the pressure of the tank, open it, and it shoots it in. It's awesome. So that way, like Kelsey was saying, how he recirculates his tank, I kind of like to let the hops, I feel with this style, you just want to be as gentle as possible. And I think by building some of that natural carbonation, I think maybe the carbonation inside, this is just my theory, the hops get in there and it just helps move everything around and get the extraction better. I mean, we have seen times where we forget to close those tanks and we dry hop, and it's just there's not as good. It's just the hop expression, aroma, and flavor is just not as good.
Well, I will say that, to add on what you're talking about from my experience, if we are not, we're similar in dry hopping techniques to where we're not recirculating these tanks, but if we don't put some pressure on the tank to push these hops from this sort of lily pad that forms on the top of the tank. And if we're not putting some positive pressure on there to push these all into the beer, then I'm in the same boat. There's two things that I've experienced that happen on there. One is the first thing you said, where the hop intensity is not what you wanted it to be. And you're just kind of nosing the glass and going where are we at here? Aroma? Yeah, where's the aroma? Where's the flavor? But the other thing that I find really interesting too is that if you're not getting those hops incorporated at that time, we've seen just this this dank kind of garlic onion thing rise up to where all the hops that were sitting in there and this sort of that were in my mind earlier on were just kind of slowly drifting down into the tank. Instead, once you put that positive pressure and you start crashing the tank, you're now doing a cold dry hop on these tanks, and that's where we started to see some danker beers out of what that is, when I'm personally looking for this nice fruit expression, I'm also looking for, I like the kind of resiny, kind of like deep cannabis sort of character. I think that's absolutely wonderful, but I'm just personally trying to stay away from the garlic onion character. But I think that, I don't know, I just find that part of things pretty interesting. Just getting those hops incorporated really changes the overall profile for the beneficially.
And Evan, remind us, Evan, you talked about this on the West Coast IPA podcast, but you had a certain like procedure of 15 psi for so much,
just an
hours
hour
or day. Okay.
Yeah, just 1 hour for us, and we've done this enough times to where like earlier on we would look inside of the tank first. We would see this lily pad of hops sitting up there, and then we would put the positive pressure on there, and then an hour later start venting the tank back open into the blow-off bucket, and then we get back on a ladder and just take a look inside, opening up that dry hop port, and those hops have been pushed in. I mean, you could pull it from the sample valve and see that those hops have been pushed in, and it made a world of a difference.
Do you see any hops still at the top, or are they all in the liquid after that hour?
Yeah, they've been pushed in at that point. But you have to give, at least for us and what we'll do is we dry hop at the end of the day, and then we push the hops into the beer the following morning, because there's a time period where you kind of have to, at least in our experience, these hops need to get saturated with the liquid, and then once that's there, then they can actually get pushed in. Otherwise, nothing has happened for us whenever we've tried to do it earlier.
Yeah, and I think this is something that doesn't get talked about enough, and I don't know that there's an industry standard or not. I think maybe each hop processor has their own, but that comes down to hop density and how they're pelleted, and it's probably something that would be a cool research project for Hop Quality Group or someone else to really start looking at density, and I know of some brewers that have a very specific density of their hop pellets that they call out, but I think for most of us, we're getting whatever our purveyor, broker, whatever their standard is.
Wait, you can request lower density hop pellets?
I do know of a brewer that has a very specific density, and I'm sure there's more than one. But yes, that they're doing their own hop blends, and they're taking them to a broker or someone that'll pellet third party, and they're saying, this is the density I want. And,
wow.
And they figure it out, whatever it is. I'm sure it took them a while to figure it out, but you can do that.
Yeah, softer pellet, harder pellet.
If you have the right relationship and whatnot, and whatever your situation is. But like you said, Evan, a hard pellet is just gonna. I think you've probably all seen it, where you dump a cone, you shave a cone, and there's still almost like dry pellets down there, full pellets. And, and then the flip side is something that's just powder, and, give Yakima Chief a lot of credit for figuring out the density of the cryo, the early lupulin powder. You had added and it just hung at the top, but, figured it out over time. And now it sinks like a regular pellet, as I'm sure all the other hop companies have figured out over time as well.
Should we talk about some of the impacts that Steve was hinting back at the first 20 minutes of the podcast about some of the impact of individual hops, both on color, on the texture of the beer, of haze stability, and then also in this kind of broader creative realm, flavors that become complementary, that work within this kind of fruit flavor expectation, and then of course hops from different origins that are creating different stories for you out of these beers. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why don't you start on this one, Kelsey, since Evan already talks a lot.
It's so good.
I feel like Citra is, kind of that is the foundation point for a lot of these beers. Citra goes so well with the ester profile of, the yeast strain that we're working with. I feel like that creates a canvas that we can, kind of layer on things to go in any sort of, different composition. And it lends well to, interesting varieties that might be fruity, tropical, that are Pacific Northwest, or, even stuff that we might, sprinkle into a recipe like Hallertau Blanc, can add some really interesting character. Going down into the Southern Hemisphere is like an always decision for a lot of these beers where, a lot of that, rich style tropical fruit character we're going to get from, Nelson and Motueka and, Nectaron a little bit. Some of these hops, we find that where they might be 50% charge in a West Coast IPA end up being kind of a 10% accent note on a hazy IPA, because they're just so overbearing in what they provide, and so it's kind of what complements the Citra a lot of the time. And then, thinking
so
about
when there's a lot more bitterness in the beer, it can handle some of those more intense Southern Hemisphere flavors versus the softer, fruitier, where that's a larger percentage, they just have much more impact.
Yeah, and I think at that point we're not looking at when we were talking about bitterness being, I guess, a bit of an aggressive element. Something that has a very aggressive, intense, kind of rough, coarse, kind of hop character that a West Coast IPA wants. We can sprinkle in a little bit of that into a hazy IPA and add some nuance and texture and interest without completely, smothering the soft, mango-esque fruity notes of that kind of Citra, backbone. And that isn't to say that we'll always, go that direction. We've done plenty of concept beers where it's like, okay, well, I don't have a flowable version of this hop. I want to do a very, Southern Hemisphere focused beer. I want, huge Nelson presence, and, maybe I want to use some Rakow or something that's going to give me some fruit punch or something. And I'm just trying to like layer in, a variety of flavor that's going to be complementary to that ester profile. That's kind of, in a nutshell, how I'm looking at these hops and what they're going to bring to the table.
Steve, you build a kind of common baseline through Jasper, and then throw different iterations on it, and that lets you understand what what these other hops provide within the context of this thing that you understand. It's a pretty common brewer tactic to kind of use one core hop and then riff off of it with other hops. Talk to us about your process around building these hop combinations.
I gotta agree with Kelsey that Citra's a lot of what we do. Jasper's all Citra.
Not a hot take here. I mean, this is
not a hot take. Not a hot take at all. It's just one of those hops that I feel it's just perfect for this style, because it's a great, like Kelsey said, it's a great baseline to give you all that flavors that you want. And to me, it plays well with, like, I can't think of one hop it doesn't really play well with in this style. Like, it just plays well with everything. So that's like, obviously big with us. New Zealand hops, we use a lot of those. They're actually my favorite hops out there at this time and point. I think the flavor and I think the expression of these hops at this time and point right now is just over the top. It's just, I haven't really found any hops right now that match that. Nelson being one of them. Nelson is a hop that we use a lot. I think, that's one of the hops that people really, when we make Nelson beers, people really, those sell out pretty quick for us. Just in our process, I think we get a lot of people that are like, I don't like Nelson. And then they have our beer, like, I actually like this.
It's because there's a lot of Citra in it too.
No, we don't. We have beers that just are all, like if you look at Jasper with Nelson is that's probably one of my favorite beers that we make. It's just that Citra Nelson combo, like that's a great, Citra Galaxy, Citra Nelson. I mean, those are.
What's the combo look like
just,
for you? Is it 50-50 or do you gear it differently for different hops?
I gear it differently for different hops. So, Yakima Chief has this great chart. It's a survivable compound chart. And I recommend that any brewer, anybody look at that, because we've really like changed our recipes of what hops go where. What hops go on the hot side, what we stick with the dry hop. So let's just take Jasper Nelson. It's probably hot side, it's just Citra, and then it's a 50-50 split of Citra and Nelson. But Nelson's a great hot side hop. I mean, phenomenal hot side hop. Motueka, phenomenal hot side hop. What else is there?
The peacherine that you sent to all of us was I thought that one, I drank that the other night. Like that was really pretty spectacular also.
Yeah, so I've found with that hop, less is more with that hop. I think it's a great accent hop. So for that beer that you had, it was again all Citra base, and then that was probably about 70% Citra dry hop and 30% peacherine. But the color on that peacherine makes the color is just fantastic with the with that Galaxy peacherine Citra. What else? Raquel, another one of my favorite hops. I'm kind of rambling right now, so if anybody else wants to,
Evan, are you a big Citra focused hazy IPA brewer as well, or not?
No, we don't use it. No. I mean, it's just so funny, dude. It's like this is like I feel like talking to Czech brewers about what kind of hop they're using in their Pilsner, where it's like, hey, what are you using? And they're like, hey, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It's Saz. And you're like, oh, Saz. And so, yeah, I feel like that's, I couldn't agree more. And I was going to say almost exactly the same things that both of these guys said, where it's just like, Citra to me is the quintessential hop for Hazy IPA. I mean, the way that it combines with the peach character from the yeast strain that we use to have this mango, really bright mango peach sort of character, along with a good amount of citrus as well. I mean, there's nothing that I think hits quite like that. So, yeah, we almost have a rule for just about every beer needs to be 50% Citra for it to be like, what we want it to be.
Let me ask you, all of you, this: if you were making a new Hazy IPA recipe, you can't use Citra and you can't use Mosaic and you can't use Strata, what's your base hop?
Oh, Nelson.
Nelson.
Yeah, Nelson. 100%.
All right.
Hey, are you guys both on Nelson too? Because that's like
all of you at the same time. That's
hands
good.
down. I would go Nelson because, I mean, my favorite beers that we make on the Hazy IPA front as well. Steve, I echo what you said a lot. I mean, that Citra Nelson combo, Nelson by itself, but I really love. One of the beers that I sent you guys is the beer that we do called Swim Test. This double dry hopped hazy triple IPA. That's a 7.5 pound per barrel dry hop, and that is, I want to say, anywhere from 75 to 80% Citra, and then the rest of it's Nelson. Just this little sprinkle. It might even be less. It might even be 15%. I wish I had my notes with me right now and on that specific beer, but that combo to where it's not getting, say, full petrol, it's not getting in regards to the Nelson, it's not bringing too much of that sort of New Zealand fresh tennis ball sort of character, and instead it's just bringing in and highlighting just enough pineapple with the combination of flavors to where it kind of ends up reminding me a little of this cactus cooler sort of thing.
Which is truly a SoCal thing.
Cactus cooler?
Oh yeah, Steve's not going to know what cactus cooler is. I don't think Jamie probably knows what cactus cooler is.
Oh, what?
Oh no, that's a truly Southern California, because I'm from Temecula, as you guys know. I grew up with cactus cooler, but probably most people listening to this, unless they're from Southern California,
it's a
like,
orange pineapple soda.
Yep.
And
it's so good.
Oh man, I grew up on that shit.
I did
it's
too.
Just like, that's so funny. I didn't realize that the rest of the world wasn't drinking cactus cooler 6-pack at a time as a, teenager. But I digress.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting that you all said Nelson. Is that for you, Evan? Is that Nelson on the hot and cold side?
We'll do both for sure. I mean, because similar to what both of these other guys are up to, I mean, we're just constantly rotating through different beers, and it's fun for, I feel like, everybody involved, maybe other than me, because I have to continue to come up with new recipes all the time and new labels and names and all these other sort of things, and then new processes that I have to teach the brewers. But at the same time, I get really excited about every single one of these projects, to where it's like, let's make something new. Like, let's try something new. Hey, I listened to this on a podcast. I don't need to wait 6 months for that next sort of turn in the production calendar. And instead, I figure out our brew schedule, hopefully by Friday, the week before we brew it. And so there's a constant rotation of things. And so, yeah, I think that that is where all of this, continues to get fun. But Nelson on the cold side is my personal favorite. But when it comes to, West Coast, I really like Nelson Whirlpools for sure. I mean, that's absolutely wonderful. But I don't know. I mean, just put Nelson on anything, and I'll probably eat it.
Is there some way that you some Citra characters that you look for? Obviously, selection. You guys are still pretty small. Maybe not you as much, Evan, but are there certain characters that you look for in the Citra that you use, that you that you pull, that you consistently go for? Because we say Citra, that's a core, but there's also a range to Citra within the hop itself, and there are some Citras that you're going to really love, and there's probably some Citras that you don't love as much.
Who's up, Kelsey?
Sure, I'll jump in. For our scale, we're obviously limited to what gets put on the selection table.
We're all limited to that, by the way.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like when we go up to Yakima Chief and select hops, we're not solo selecting because we're small. We did less than 3,000 barrels this year, and we might do a little bit north of that, in the next 12 months. So we just don't have the capacity to have like a massive selection of lots. And, usually we're presented with 3. And if there's not one in there that's really great, they might give us a 4th. So, the first part of selection with any hop is, let's get rid of the high notes that are negatives, and then we're looking for, out of what's left, with Citra, I'm always trying to find a little bit of mango in there, but that's about as elusive as the, blueberry mosaic. They exist, but you're probably not going to get it presented to you. So, looking past that, it's like, well, which one has the bright citrus? Which one's not throwing a bunch of OG? Which one has like, niceties to it, that we're going to assume, because we don't know when this bale is going to get processed into pellets. And when it does, is it going to have, aged, significantly and altered its condition? There's just too many unknowns. So, for where we're able to select, we're always looking for, eliminate the negatives and pick the best lot.
Are you an early or a late harvest Citra when you're selecting?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or picking window, I should say.
No, I should look at that a little bit tighter and kind of see what we've picked the last few years, because I feel like the last few years is when we've gotten more and more consistent with what we're trying to target just based on raw sensory. But I can't answer the question until I look at the data. So I'll make a note to follow up.
Steve, do you do selection?
Yeah. We actually go through a lot of Citra. We've done selection for 2 years. The Citra that we look for, the Citra I'll say that I selected this year that I've really been searching for. I guess when you buy more, you get better lots, I guess. But,
I don't know if it's that. I think as much as anything, it's, it's kind of timing too. It's a bit being in the IPA category at a beer, competition. Like there's a lot of really good IPA out there. And sometimes it's just a matter of like, who you end up on the table with. And, to some degree, it's the first man to the moon. But, I also think some of it is just timing and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I mean, I say that like
in jest, I know.
Yeah, but it's no. We work with Yakima Chief. They do a fantastic job. So we go up to this year. We found this beautiful lot that was mango, but it was sweet orange. I mean, just sweet orange, and we kept going around, but I mean, there is lots that do have that onion garlic, and we don't want that. And I would say for my pick window, I kind of find myself going a little bit later. So Yakima Chief stopped by the brewery and they put me in this like blind sensory test, and they didn't tell me what hop I was smelling. They didn't tell me the pick window, and they just had me go around and just smell all these lots from all these farms. And I come to find out I really do not like early pick. Like that was the one that I loved all late pick. And I don't know, I like late pick. I like high oil content. I mean, that's very important when we look for it.
What did the early Citra contribute that you didn't like personally? Obviously,
grassiness. There was just in every single one of them, it was grassy, and every lot I would just be like, it's grassy, and then the gentleman that was giving me the sensory test, he just laughed. He'd be like, "Damn, dude." He's just like, so it was like we had to rate each lot 1 through 3, and every one was the same order. It was always, late was my favorite, then target, and then early was not.
I remember, Steve, the day when Natalie and I had that epiphany moment of like, we know what Simcoe, we like Simcoe's our top hop, and like that was a magical moment, and maybe the same for you, because suddenly what your lane is for Citra, for you, Simcoe for us, whatever it is for anyone else, and it's a good feeling to know that and it takes a long time to learn it sometimes too.
Yeah, that's such a nice, cool side-by-side that you were able to take part in, because I talk about this with our customers often, to where they may not know what hop varietal they like or don't like or whatever else, and they might not be able to articulate it, but all they know is they smell it and they taste it and they go thumbs up or thumbs down. And so to have the opportunity to be able to instead like have this learning lesson and be like, cool, this is me coming out on the other side, like knowing a little bit more about this process is wonderful. Yeah, because now when I go to select next year, I can say, hey, I'm looking for late harvest. I'm looking for this oil. And then they can really narrow down, instead of putting stuff on the table that I'm just going to reject anyway. Now I get 4 or 5 lots that are prime for my liking, for what I want, for my, and so that's just really, I mean, as we keep doing this, you just learn, and you learn what you like in your beer. And it just, and plus too, though, to Kelsey's point about, when you smell it, does that hop translate into the beer? And that's always like a fear of mine, like, oh, it smells great on the table, but is it going to translate in that beer? That's the hardest part about our this game for us. And I'm sure Vinny's experienced it too many times too, where it's just like you do a rub on a hop and you're like, oh yeah, I'm getting that. like you're in Yakima, and you go by some of these other suppliers. At least that's what I try to do when I'm in town. And then I'm just like, all right, yeah, what do you got? Oh, we got this new hop, and you rub it, and you're like, oh, that's what I want. Yeah, let me get 2,000 pounds. Okay, wonderful. And then like you go to another place, yeah, I'll make it 4. Why not? And then like, man, I've just gotten burned on that whole thing enough times to where like I just like, it's like being in Vegas. You're just like, all right, take our money off the table. I'm walking away, like because you need to get that hop into beer, and see how it expresses before you can go all in.
Right.
Yep.
So if we see you at the roulette table at CBC this year, go the other direction.
Okay, I love roulette. I absolutely love gambling. I'm not good at it, but I love doing it. I have a $200 limit. I used to be 100, so I've upped it to 200, and I'm feeling pretty baller about that.
Business must be good. $200 limit, man.
For my once a year gambling opportunity where I'm like, all right, okay, I got to make the night last. And then once I lose 100, I stop for a while, start drinking Negronis, and then get some liquid courage. And then I jump back in to lose another $100.
I went to Vegas last year, didn't gamble once. And I suspect that's going to be the story this year too, when I'm back there. But, we'll see how it all goes. We've been talking for a while now. One topic I wanted to get to before we close here is, the question of basically, gravity and scale in Hazy IPA. I think when we look at what Hazy IPA is, there are, as you mentioned, Evan, you used to make a lot of triple IPAs, a lot of double IPAs. It felt like this intensity level, whereas we might like a single, West Coast IPA because it's drinkable and it's crisp and, and finishes pretty dry and we can drink a bunch of them, but also get that hop fix. When it comes to Hazy IPA, there's almost, for a lot of its history, that double IPA was probably a better hop expression and captured that intensity maybe more, the possibility in those hop flavors more so than hazy pale ale or, a hazy single IPA. Where do you, but at the same time, we're also watching consumer behaviors change. We're also seeing weird things happen, like people buying double IPAs to take home, but not drinking them on premise, like strange mixes of draft versus package that don't track in the same way that they might have used to. In the sense, what do you, talk about, how these gravities impact the beers themselves, the expressions of these flavors, and where you see, customers today gravitating towards, to use an incredibly dad pun in all of this.
So I think you're 100% right when you talked about people buying cans to take home, like the double IPA and triple IPA. That's 100. I mean, I see that now that we have the tap room. Tap room has been open for since July, and it's like a triple IPA keg will sit there for a little while, But our lager, we fly through lager, we fly through oatmeal stout, we low West Coast, we go through. But can sales, the cans just fly. So we package more of the bigger beers for can sales, and then less for draft. But as far as, I think my sweet spot for Hazy IPA, I think is that 8 to 8.5 range. I think that is the perfect vessel for the ultimate of flavor, hop expression. I just think that is like that is it. But that being said, it's not drank as much in the tap room as other things. So we've had to expand. We do hazy pales. Hazy pales do very well for us. 5%.
Really?
Hazy
That's
pales
cool.
do.
About draft or cans?
Both actually. Summertime I'll do 30 barrel batches of hazy pale, and it goes. So that's something that's been really good for us because
so there's some kind of bookend there where if somebody wants a really drinkable, crushable, sessionable, hazy pale, they may choose that. Whereas they're not going to and then if they want that flavor, they'll pop up to double IPA territory.
Yeah. I mean, we see a lot of people come in and their first pour is probably double. They usually get a double, and then after that, it's all low for the most part, and they take their cans home.
Interesting. So, you seem to be agreeing on that one, Evan.
I mean, yeah, we're in a similar boat for sure. I mean, we were looking at like triple IPA numbers within the last couple of weeks, and it's just so funny. I mean, like we're doing like 10%, or maybe I think 10% is draft, and 90% of it is cans. You know, like people are coming in and having a triple IPA at the place or at our spot is just way less popular than grabbing a 4-pack of 10% ABV beer and just taking it home. And I absolutely respect that choice. I think that's a solid move. But yeah, I'm with Steve for sure. I mean, like, I think these beers lend themselves to a little bit higher ABV, and Hazy single IPA, if that was the only thing that would exist, like it just isn't big enough, and it isn't sort of juicy enough for like to create the craze that this is all created. And instead, once we're jumping into double, triple categories or territory, it's just, it's so rich, it's so intense, and it's like, it just truly feels like something you've never had before if you've never had a beer like that made by Fidens or North Park, and so it's pretty fun.
How about you, Kelsey?
I mean, I'm not going to say a whole lot different from what Steve and Evan said. It does tend to tip a scale, and I mentioned this in the opening comments, where the lower ABV versions tend to be the ones that people will consume. Our guests will drink more of those in our tap room. They may buy a reasonable amount of that in package, but when we go to those higher ABV double, triple IPAs, if we've got a few of them available, the typical guest that wants to take those home is going to buy a 4-pack or 2, and they're going to try a 5-ounce pour while they're there. And I mentioned that our best-selling beer, if we amalgamated all the different artist hards, would be that beer, and Hazy IPA, Hop Fu being the second place to that. West Coast, our overall product mix on draft is about a third hazy, a third West Coast, and a third lager. And when you look at the can sales, like the high gravity Hazy IPAs just fly, and everything else kind of tapers towards the lager on the package. So it's a different experience for a different time, is what our guests are telling us. It's like, I want to drink these big, rich, intense, fruity, Hazy IPAs, high gravity stuff. I want to drink them at home, or with my friends or something, that not at your tap room. But boy, am I going to crush a bunch of lagers when I'm there.
Yeah. We deal with the same. I mean, we're in the same boat. I mean, lager, draft, we have a seltzer that is the only flagship that we have at our brewery, it's Lavender Lemonade, and that thing's 20 to 25% of our sales every week. Just like just crushes, and it working on more seltzer flavors, but it's like we we're a house of West Coast IPA, lager, Hazy IPAs, and the seltzer, and it just but it's interesting, like, to Kelsey's point, like those can take homes are just absolutely the path for what those are, and we don't rely on draft sales of those beers too much. Other than Hazy single IPA is sort of the opposite for our brewery, does really well on draft, and not necessarily a lot of people. Those are some of our lower can numbers whenever we're doing canning runs.
And then I've got one more question on that. On that double IPA side, that ratio of finishing gravity to general bitterness, probably calculated since not everyone's testing these things. What's that? What balance? What is there? A range there that you really find works well in these? I think people have this perception of these being sweeter than they are. And especially as I taste all of your beers through, all three of your beers through this, they come across as having more, more structure to them than I think is commonly acknowledged. So maybe would finish on this. There's some sort of balance that you try to find through that finishing gravity to bitterness, and knowing that this bitterness is a weird one to calculate, since so much of it is pushed in, even added through the cold side.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say, is that we don't know what bitterness contribution we're getting from all this polyphenol character on paper. Like, I can plug a recipe into, software and say, okay, it's got 10 BUs. And when I'm putting in my bitterness addition on the hot side, I'm thinking about that is a stable, piece of bitterness that, sure, it's going to drop off over time, but hopefully somebody's drinking this beer within, 30 to 60 days. That would be the ultimate. I don't want somebody sitting on this for too long, but finishing gravity, when we get to above that, like 8.5%, when we're at 8.5% or up, I'm looking at, 4.6 to 4.8 Plato. And I'm looking at, beyond that, if there's an alcohol sweetness contribution, that's continuing to carry forward any perceived sweetness. As it gets stronger, I don't want to add more, body in dextrins. I don't want to add, more to the composition through some unfermented, sugars. So that's kind of where I go, and I'm curious to see, what Evan and Steve have to say about that.
And so I can't remember, you're not using Chit malt, or you are?
No, we've been using Chit since our first collab with Steve, because he opened my eyes to what I think is a really wonderful, kind of pillowy element to the style.
Steve, you're next.
Sure. For double IPA, probably around 4 Plato. We finish at. That's kind of where we like it. We get any higher than that, we get around that. I'll say that though. But our hazy pales, we finish at 5 Plato. I like to start those a little higher. We mash a little higher. It finishes a little higher. That way I can hop them kind of like a single. So it still gets that nice flavor. But yeah. So for finishing gravity, around 4 Plato.
We're getting up a little bit higher than both you guys, around 5 to 5.5 on those beers. For finishing gravity, I think there's this interesting, there's something to consider in all of what this information is that we're all spewing out here, which is there's a balance that occurs within all of what these things are, that between acidity and sweetness and bitterness, ABV, that ends up creating the thing that we're looking for. And you can't just look at one single aspect of this and go like, oh damn, that's a high finishing gravity, yeah, da 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 da. And instead it's like, well, that's the spot that we've gotten in because we feel like that's the balance that we're looking for. And when you consider the dry hop load, for most of these beers and the rest of the little details that go into it, that's the balance that we've created in our beers.
That's why I very specifically asked the question with both of those things, because I think that, looking at any one of these numbers, in isolation never tells an entire story. And so
totally.
Yeah.
Vinny, did I miss any questions before we wrap this up? Is there anything else on your list that you had put together on this?
I don't think so. I just had one kind of closing comment that I was just thinking of that harkens back to the West Coast IPA podcast, and that how much of our conversation wasn't about hops, just like West Coast IPA. There's so much more about process and procedure, and in this case, water. I always find that really interesting when we, talking about a style like this that's an IPA, but yet there's so much more that goes to it beyond the hops.
Yep. Totally agree.
It's especially an interesting piece where texture, body, mouthfeel, all of these things are so important in this style and make or break it. versus just like, just the hop blend and hop selection. So much of that is actually more consistent these days, and is almost more settled, right? Because you guys know what works. And then the thing that differentiates truly excellent and world-class are all of these other elements that support those things. And so, the difference between some of these beers that you all have sent that I'm tasting now that have won so many awards or, put you in the top 13 of breweries in the world on Untapped, Steve, these are just,
dude,
right?
That's nuts. I was looking at that like this week and I was just like, all right, Pally, getting it.
We should say
impressive.
Of breweries with over 100,000 check-ins, he's in the number 2 spot.
Oh, man. I
number
was
3 if
it.
you break that down to 50,000 check-ins or more. Anyway,
I was looking at his Untapped rating as a brewery at, I think, first, and I was just like, holy cow. Like, our brewery is nowhere close to that. And truly impressive, Steve. That's really cool to get to that level, man. It's awesome.
You know what else is impressive, Evan? A gold medal from World Beer Cup for wherever you go. or say back-to-back silver medals for X-Ray, the series that Kelsey has produced at GABF. So there's definitely some winning going on here and some excellent iterations within this style. Oh, Evan's breaking out his best in beer trophies. Of course, Vinny's not in their conference room to show you his.
It's our collection.
Anyway, appreciate you all talking to me about Hazy, or talking with our entire audience about your approaches to Hazy IPA. And thank you, Vinny, for helping me co-host this. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew's engineering team prides itself on providing true customized turnkey solutions. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast Diacetyl Knockout Series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. ABS Commercial are proud to offer brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country. Secure your brewery accelerator spot now at breweryworkshop.com. SS Brewtech is dedicated to an engineering-first approach to brewery equipment and powers R&D at some of the world's greatest breweries, present company included. Christian Hansen's Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria allows for consistent performance and high quality. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to, brew your own iteration or reference Steve's recipe for Jasper Double IPA, subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and gain access to all of the great recipes that folks have shared. And I was looking at, we have great recipes from North Park and from Green Cheek. They're all West Coast IPAs, though. Maybe we should add, a Hazy IPA recipe in there, just as folks are listening to this, in order to continue to encourage them to subscribe and support our mission to bring great brewing content to you. I'll hit you guys up on email after this one. Kelsey, if people want to learn more about North Park, where do they find you?
Check us out on Instagram at North Park Beer Co. Go to our website, northpark.beer or northparkbeerco.com. We're on Facebook at North Park Beer Co. That's the easy.
Evan, for Green Cheek, where do they find you all?
I mean, you can usually find me at North Park drinking one of Kelsey's beers. And so, I would go to their tap room and check it out. I have a great time there. Their French fries are incredible. What else do they have? I mean, last time we were there, the chef whipped up some Wagyu steak for us. Obviously that was an off-item thing, but that was pretty cool. Anyway, greencheekbeer.com, at greencheekbeer for Instagram, and we have 3, soon to be 4 spots. We're adding a spot in Oceanside soon. We're really excited about, and going to be working with the fucking national treasure that is Jeff Bagby, and I couldn't be more excited to collaborate with him on a weekly, daily, whatever basis, because it's just absolute legend in every way.
Powerhouse dream team right there. Steve, if people want to learn more about Fidens, where do they find you all?
Instagram at Fidens Brewing, and fidensbrewing.com, and on Facebook at Fidens Brewing.
And Vinny, I think most people know where to find you, but just in case.
Yeah, he's at the Green Cheek tap room. Yeah.
I was going to say every Thursday in the Pilot Brewery here in Windsor, which you guys know. So now RussianRiverBrewing.com and Russian River Brewing Official is our Instagram, because at some point there was an unofficial that, whatever, Natalie figured it out. So anyways, it's all good. Hey, I thank you, Jamie, for including me in this. I learned a lot. Thanks to you guys for spending all this time. It was really fun to co-host. It was awesome.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.